Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day. Welcome to our Big Book workshop on steps 8 and 9 and forgiveness. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. That's my email address if you don't have it, and you're welcome to make contact with me. But more importantly, that's my website address, so that you can explore the resources that are available, not only to support your work in the 9th step and the forgiveness process, but each of the steps. I also have a YouTube channel with several different playlists on it that you might find helpful. herbk.com, I believe, will get you to the YouTube in some way. Herb K YouTube or something like that. You'll figure it out if I did. Today we're going to talk about freedom and forgiveness. Freedom in terms of the step 8 and 9 process specifically, and then the broader product or outcome of steps 4 through 9, which I've experienced as and give the name of forgiveness, a decision to release them and an experience of being released. I want to be helpful. That's the whole point of this. And we were talking before we started as to perhaps the relevancy of this topic. I felt there are 2 topics that were transformative. If I could name 2 topics back in 1988 that changed my life, 2 experiences with the steps. My very first, I was 4 years sober in 1988. Number 1 was column 3 and 4, the resentment inventory. It was radical, life-changing, completely 180-degree turnaround for me. And the other was steps 8 and 9. Not that I didn't have experiences with the other steps, I did. But I would say the most radical, profound, visible, objectively described changes included step 8 and 9, and a forgiveness, an introduction to the forgiveness process. So in thinking about the agenda for this year, when I was doing that last year at this time, I thought it might be relevant for people to have more exposure to those 2 topics. And I decided to do them quarterly. I've done 2 workshops on column 3 and column 4. I've done 2 workshops on steps 8 and 9 and the forgiveness process this year. We had a reasonable amount of people who came to that, but perhaps because of summer, or perhaps because there's not a lot of interest, or as we discussed in the pre-session today, conversation, that the information on the flyer needs to be a little bit more robust and inviting, and perhaps even a little more creative, so that people know that it's a dynamic thing. It's not a repeat of the old. It's not a redundant exercise. It's really an exploration on an ongoing basis of people's experience with both of those exercises, those processes. Step 8 and 9 are the conclusion to the forgiveness process. At the end of that journey of the steps in 1988, I was introduced to Fred Luskin. Most of you who have attended me at all know that I'm a big fan of his work and his book, Forgive for Good. Fred Luskin is a clinical psychologist, a professor at Stanford, who 30 years ago wrote his dissertation on forgiveness from a psychological standpoint. No spirituality at all. No, none, zero, pure science. He wrote his dissertation on forgiveness. And then later on, concluded that the general public wouldn't read the dissertation. He had to convert it to a book that people would read and understand and be able to practice. And that book is Forgive for Good. And I very thoughtfully, I give it a lot of thought, have called that book the second best book I've ever read. And I have an extensive background in studies and reading. The first, of course, you probably would anticipate, is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not because it's particularly well written. It is, but that's not my point. It's not a literary book. It's the most effective book for human development, transformation, change that I've ever come across, because it has specific directions as to what to do in order to change, radical change. That's the whole definition of a spiritual awakening. To wake up from being asleep, not knowing that we're asleep. In fact, one of the philosophers you've heard me quote, Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher from the 19th century, says, most human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. And the whole process of human development is about waking up. Freud said it in his own way. He said the human task for every individual is to make the unconscious conscious. Waking up. Otherwise, he says, he continues, if we don't make the unconscious conscious, then the unconscious drives our perception about reality, and we conclude that we're a victim of circumstances or other people's ill will. He used the term malevolence, meaning bad intentions. These are serious thinkers who are helping people who are interested. And that's a grace in itself. We were talking about that before. That you're interested in something, some spark, some awakening, some irritation that brings you to want to remove the stone from the shoe. Most people just adapt and live with the stone and think suffering, that's just part of life. In fact, in my Irish Catholic background, the elders would talk about the veil of tears. That was it. You'll get your reward in heaven. Oh my. No, I want it now. Thank you. I'm an addict. So I'm going to begin. And then I'm going to pause. And if you have, I hope you have pen and paper there. If you have any questions, concerns, observations, experiences, resistances, disagreements, it's all on the table. And if you want to crosstalk a little bit, not in a confrontational way or argumentative way, no, that's not what we're doing here. Not in a group therapy way, no, that's not what we're doing here. But this is a community of serious people, serious seekers, serious finders. Most of the people who come to any of these Saturday events, they're not just seekers. They've already found something. It might only be they found a really good question, but they are finders. And for all my life, up through the first 4 years of sobriety, I prided myself on being a seeker. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I didn't see. That seeking is really good, but finding is so much better. But I had never had the experience of finding, so I was a seeker. And that was my badge until I did this step work. the material that I'll be talking today a little bit about. A little bit about the steps, not the entire panoramic view. And at the end of 1988, the beginning of 1989, when I finished those 12 steps and I finished my amends process and I had completed the forgiveness process through the 12 steps, I didn't know about the psychological process, which happens to be a parallel process with different words. When I had completed that, I looked back over my shoulder and I was just shocked because I had found what I had been looking for all those years. I was seeking without knowing what I was seeking. And when I found it, I wasn't looking for it, but I found it, a spiritual awakening. And it was shocking and it was revealing and it was wonderful. And it's continued because, and you've heard me share this, I stay gently pressed up against this process. Well, by my standards, gently. I'm pretty robust in my effort at my personal spiritual life and my personal development, and then helping other people have a robust spiritual life. I stay gently pressed up against this. And the really good news is it just continues. Not only does it just continue, but it gets bigger. Like that dimmer switch. When you press it on, it goes on at a very low voltage and a little bit of juice goes into it. A little bit of electricity goes into the conduit. But as you turn that dimmer switch up, you lean gently into it, one click at a time, the lights get brighter and the lights get brighter and the lights get brighter. And the really good news, and you've heard me say it, is that we're in relationship with infinite light. Please hear that. At least this is my vocabulary for the experience. We're in relationship with infinite light. Therefore, it's never going to stop. It's always going to grow. It's always going to get bigger. And I say it regularly, be prepared to be surprised. It's my story. And I could give you visible examples, almost annual, since 1989, but I won't. But trust me, and you've heard, if you've been around me at all, you've heard it seep out in different ways. I mean, it's ideal for an addict. We're always wanting more. And then when we experience it, it reinforces that. Not all the time, of course. There are lulls in the process. Not because there's a lull in the growth, but there's a lull in the consciousness of the growth until there's an accumulated energy, an accumulated light that gives us sufficient amount of light to see that there has been another shift in the consciousness. Well, that was a lot. I hope it was helpful. So today we're talking about freedom. That's my one word that I would use for steps 1 through 9. Bill uses it. I'll talk about it in a minute in the big book. He does talk about forgiveness in the big book and in the 12 and 12. But of course, he's a lay person. He's not got a very extensive education. It was actually a very focused education. He studied to be a lawyer. He completed his exams. He never got his law degree. He got the law degree, but he never got he never passed the state bar. He wasn't a registered attorney, but he had that kind of education. But fortunately, he was brilliant. And he was able to navigate the 6 steps of the Oxford group to have a spiritual experience. And then he, like us, was a seeker. And then he found in that hospital a spiritual experience, that mountaintop mystical transformative experience. And he continued then his journey of learning. He read William James varieties of religious experience because he wanted to understand his own spiritual experience. And from that, he understood that not everybody has that mountaintop mystical experience. Most everybody, if they embrace a spiritual path, most everybody has a spiritual awakening. That's the title of my second book. The cover is here in the background. 12 Steps to Spiritual Awakening. It has 12 chapters, one chapter on each step, both the knowledge that I have interpreting the big book and the knowledge of how to apply the steps, but also my experience with applying the steps. It must be effective because it's in its sixth printing since 2010. Step 8 and 9 are a promise of freedom. I'm not making that up. Bill doesn't use it in the concise words that I'm using here, but check page 84 in the big book. He says we're placed in a position of neutrality. When we finish step 9, check the phrase, we are placed, hear the grace of that. We are placed, we can't do it. This isn't human development. This is the implosion of powerlessness, implosion into powerlessness, the recognition that I cannot do this. And yet, I need to. I need to do the steps in order to have some sense of willingness, some sense of action, some sense of precondition to receive the grace, or have the grace that I've received blossom into some type of behavior change. Notice how I said that. I don't know which comes first, grace or willingness or grace. You've heard me talk about it if you've been around me at all. There's a mystery there, that touch point of the spirit and my spirit. The spirit with a capital S, my spirit with a small s. There's a touch point of grace. Comes from the Latin word gratia, meaning a gift, not earned, no preconditions, a gift. Bill talks about it in one of the talks I listened to within the last year, just recently. He uses a phrase that I'd never heard before, and it's not in the literature. I was delivered. Man, I love that because that's my experience. I did the steps. And of course, it's a grace that I got sober, and it's a grace that I came to AA, and it's a grace that I got a sponsor, and it's a grace at 4 years of sobriety that I was inclined to do the steps. And it was a grace that I actually did them. But see, that's all the energy of that seeker dynamic, that deep hunger, that deep thirst that keeps moving us forward. But I wouldn't have moved forward without my cooperation, without my action, without my reaction, without my taking the actual energy to apply the direction I was getting and the information that I was getting. But I don't explain the math. Regular math, I'm good at. 1 + 1 = 2. That's regular math. When I look back at my experience at the end of 1988, beginning of 1989, I know now about spiritual math. 1 + 1 = 5. Because the outcome of my process was geometrically larger than my contribution to it. I had been involved in organized religion, organized psychology, organized therapy, organized self-help, informal everything. I mean, I'm a seeker. Yes, I'm a seeker. But then eventually I was a finder. And I could see that the outcome of what I had accomplished, or what I had experienced, a much better term, what I had experienced, the outcome of what I had experienced was considerably larger than my contribution to it. I could not get here from there, and yet here I am, radically changed. Now, Bill talks on page 84 about the freedom from addiction, that first half of the first step, placed in a position of neutrality. Well, and that's how it translates for me. That's about the first half of the first step, addiction. It's a promise. Anybody who has a problem with relapse hasn't done the first 9 steps thoroughly and effectively. That's not a judgment. That's just an evaluation, because the promise is in the big book, page 84. We are placed in a position of neutrality. There's no qualification on that. When you finish the 9th step, and I don't mean perfectly, to the best of your ability, you will be given freedom from your addiction, whatever that is. But then he with the yellow flag going up, raises the caution there. We're not cured. Now, what are we not cured of? We're not cured of our unmanageability. He's not that clear. The big book's not that clear, but I am when I put it into the context. Unmanageability is the spiritual malady. Unmanageability is the cancer of the soul. Unmanageability is that self-centeredness he talks about on page 62, and the behavioral description of that self-centeredness is on page 52, those bedevilments, befuddled, to be controlled as if by devils. We're not cured of that because we're human beings. The first half of the first step addresses our addiction. Only a percentage of people are addicts. Whether that's 1 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, it's not everybody. But my conclusion is all human beings suffer from unmanageability. That's why Bill, in the first edition, the first printing of the first edition, in the preface to that first printing, the first paragraph concludes that paragraph, our way of living may have its advantages for all. Wow. All what? No, it's not all alcoholics. Look in the context. No, it's not all addicts. Bill didn't even have that awareness at the time. He was just sorting it all out. Just wrote the big book, April 1939. He was referring to the human race, our way of living based on principles and seeking God. This is his terminology. I broaden it, of course. God as we don't understand it, or power as we do. Our way of living may have its advantages for all human beings. Very inclusive. We're not cured, but we have a daily reprieve. There's the freedom, the promise of freedom, a daily reprieve. Well, look up the word reprieve, stay of execution. Yeah, we will relapse back into the bedevilments because that's our default as human beings. That self-centeredness that he talks about on page 62, and at the end of that second paragraph on page 62, he said we're as powerless over our self-centeredness as we are over alcohol, as he concluded on page 43 with regard to our addiction. There'll come a time and a place where we'll have no effective mental defense against the first drink. He has the same conclusion with regard to self-centeredness. He spends 2 pages on it, 60 to 62, but right at the top of 62, he says selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. And at the end of that second paragraph, he says, we're not capable of dealing with that effectively. Meaning we're as powerless over our self-centeredness, which is the heart of unmanageability, as we are over our addiction, which is the source of our current suffering, if in fact we're still in our addiction. So he's promising freedom from the addiction without any qualification. He's promising freedom from our unmanageability with a qualification. As long as we have a daily practice of steps 10, 11, and 12, which in that context, he calls it our way of life. Our way of life, after we get finished with the first 9 steps, daily practice of 10, 11, and 12. So if people are having problems with their life and managing their life, there's something amiss with their practice of 10, 11, and 12. Again, I'm not judging. I'm evaluating. It's 100% my experience with regard to addiction with other people, because I was given the grace of freedom from addiction before I even asked for it. Freedom from the addiction itself or the inclination of the addiction. A story for another day. I can't explain it. I can only be thankful for it. But I'm very familiar with unmanageability. I didn't have that experience until I was 10 years sober, going through this work for the 3rd time. The man gave me the set-aside prayer. I had begun to understand the process of it. Forgiveness, a decision to release, and a decision to be released. There we are, pathetic Herbie. Until 43, in the bondage of addiction. And until 48, 4 years sober, finishing the steps, 5 years sober, I was released from that bondage. I was given freedom. So here's a question for you. Is your life serial suffering? That's not a trick question. If today you're having continuous suffering in your life, there's something wrong with your spiritual life. I'm not judging. I'm evaluating. Just based on my understanding of the Big Book and my personal experience with it. Do you think you can change? Well, I mean, that's a trick question for you guys, because here you are. Of course you think you can change. That's why you registered for a workshop on a Saturday in July. At least you have some hope. Whether it's strong or faint, it doesn't matter. You have some hope. That's why you're here. You can change. And as I say, there's no violence here, please. No violence. Oh, you might be embarrassed and you might sweat a little, but there's no violence here when you do this work. This is about freedom, and this is about forgiveness. Look up the word forgiveness as I did. It's not fancy. We'll get to it later on if in fact you're inclined to stay with us. I looked it up and it said a decision to release them. Look at my hand. A decision to release them. Oh my God. Is it that simple? Well, yeah, actually it is. A decision to release them. But it's a process. It's not an event. It's a process. Steps 1 through 9, especially 4 through 9. And by the 9th, we come to the 9th step, a decision to address healing. I'll use that term. It's not in the Big Book. I do believe it's in the 12 and 12. But that's the outcome of the 9th step. We bring healing to the other people. We bring healing because we're changing and we're repairing the damage. And paradoxically, and you read it, you pray it in the St. Francis prayer, and you pray it in the Lord's Prayer. The paradox, you pray it. To the extent I forgive them, I am forgiven. Well, it makes no sense. That's a paradox. But we know it's the truth, and that's the paradox. It's a mystery and it makes no sense. It seems counterintuitive. Well, you've heard it in other ways. You got to give it away to keep it. Well, that makes no sense. I mean, materially. And yet, spiritually, it makes total sense because that's our experience. Please join me in this set-aside prayer. Whether you believe in God or whether you believe in prayer, at least have the willingness to have an open mind and an open heart, and have the willingness to have a positive attitude toward life and this process. I'm not asking you to believe in God. I'm not asking you to believe in prayer. I'm merely expressing my positive attitude and my open mind and my open heart in these words, which might to you be awkward and clumsy. But it's about the intention. See, prayer is not about words. It's about the intention. I want to be free, and I'm willing to have an open heart and an open mind and take some action in order to have that. I want to wake up. I don't know that I'm asleep, but my life is not working in some areas, so I at least need to have a little clue as to how to deal with that in that area. I'm willing to hear what other people suggest and what their experience is. That's the open mind and an open heart. And this is a prayer to the universe, to the spirit of the universe, to the energy of the universe. Bring your crowbar to open my mind and open my heart. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, steps 8, 9, and the forgiveness process, and you. For an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, steps 8, 9, and the forgiveness process, and especially you. Well, you probably already have seen this and you know it from your own work in the 12-step community, if you're in one. That the 12 steps are the 12 steps to freedom. It's a process of establishing a relationship. My definition of spirituality is relationship. A relationship with power, which I got in steps 1 through 3. A relationship with myself, which I got in steps 4 through 7. A relationship with others, which I got in steps 8 and 9. Now, did I get them all at once in one process? Absolutely not. I went through the work of the steps 3 different times, 3 years apart with 3 different step guides. The first time I experienced 4 through 7. The second time I experienced 8 and 9. The third time, I experienced 1 through 3. Oh yeah, it was not in order. I'm hoping you're hearing that. I've never said it that way before. It wasn't in order. And I didn't know. I did the steps in order, but I didn't have the experience in the order that is listed here. It was almost the reverse of it. But it doesn't matter, because every time I touched the steps, my consciousness improved, the light in me broadened and deepened. I lived this way, practicing 10, 11, and 12. I haven't done the steps from 1 through 12 in 20 years. I don't feel a need to. There's no serious, substantial suffering in my life anymore. There hasn't been since 1996 when I finished the work for the 3rd time. Yeah, I'm saying it that way. I have had no substantial suffering in my life since 1996. I think I've refined a comment that I might have made earlier. Just today, I'm more conscious of it. This is the promise of the 12th step, spiritual awakening. What does that mean? It's a change in the way we think and feel and behave. That's radical. My mind is changed. My attitude is changed. My behavior is changed. You hear my vocabulary. I didn't say I changed it. This is not self-development. This is not human development. This is me doing a considerable amount of work and having an experience of a gift, gratia, grace. It's done to us, not by us, but not without us. I added that last phrase about 10 years ago. Up till then, I was saying, done to us, not by us. But over time, I realized, well, I had to be there, and I had to do some work, and I had to take some direction, and I had to experiment, practice. That's why I like the term co-creation. I work in partnership with God. God's the managing partner. Partnership. And Bill illustrates that in a wonderful visual image, a metaphor, at the end of step 5, page 75. There's a promises at the end of step 5 on page 75. There's a paragraph of promises, but there's a line in there. Walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. So comforting to hold that as the image of my leading my life on a daily basis, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Yep. Not that I'm conscious of it 24/7. That would be silly. That's not my current awakening. But regularly enough that I have a sense of well-being, a sense of contentment. Rather than being in jail, the bondage of addiction or the bondage of unmanageability, I've been given freedom. Notice the cartoon's the same, except it's a broader perspective. And I know now that if I'm suffering, it's because I've got my hands on the bars in front of my face and I don't have a big enough perspective. And I need to release. There's no ceiling, there's no walls, there's no floor. I need to release something. Release, I need to forgive, whether that's other people or life itself or me. I need to release and get into the flow. Steps 8 and 9 were part of that process of the radical change. In fact, the completion of a process that started with step 4. It really starts with step 1, but those are not action steps. Steps 1 through 3 are experience steps. Step 1, I experience powerlessness. Literally, I have no sufficient power with regard to my addiction or my unmanageability. An experience, though, not just knowledge. I had to have the knowledge in order to have the experience, quite frankly. But there was no action. Step 3 is not an action step. Oh, there's a prayer, but it's not an action step. It's a commitment step. That's why I use the word choice in step 2, a decision of my will, and decision in step 3, because that decision of my will connotes a commitment to action. Step 1, I do not have any decision. I'm screwed. I'm powerless. That word is not in the big book. Step 2, I make a choice. God is or God isn't. Step 3, I make a decision to commit to action. Then the action begins with step 4. And I do believe that the forgiveness process begins with step 4. That's why I mentioned earlier that I do quarterly reviews of step 4, especially the resentment inventory, columns 3 and 4. I do believe that's the turnaround. that begins the forgiveness process, because we take full responsibility for our feelings, for our reactions, for our resentments. And then we get to the process of looking at our relationships with others. Step 8 is making a list, an inventory of harms. Step 2 was an inventory of our understanding and decision about God. Step 2 is an inventory. Step 4 is an inventory, the underlying cause and condition. Step 6 is an inventory. How do instincts gone awry manifest in behavior, character defects, shortcomings? Step 8 is inventory. And how does our instincts gone awry impact other people, damage other people or institutions? Step 4, the even steps are all about naming. The odd steps are all about action. Step 1, an experience of implosion. Step 3, a commitment to a relationship. Step 5, a commitment to full disclosure. Step 7, and recognition of our powerlessness to change, but our willingness to change and our willingness to be changed. And step 9, our willingness to make amends, meaning amends. There's two implications to that. A change in me and a repair of them. Amends has 2 implications. Don't go to somebody and talk to them about your regrets unless, in fact, you're committed to changing so that you don't repeat the behavior. I don't mean to be perfect before you make amends, no, but that you be committed to change the behavior before you make the amends. Otherwise, you're, what do they call that? Not authentic for sure. Hypocrite, that's what they call it. So step 8 is about making that list of all persons we had harmed. And like step 6, being willing. Like step 2, Bill says step 2, the heart of it is willingness. He calls it a cornerstone. Step 2, page 47. Step 2 is the cornerstone, just being willing. And step 4 is about willingness to take a deep look at the source of our problem, the exact nature of our problem, looking at the truth, looking at the delusions, looking at the beliefs, looking at the motives. Oh my God, it's embarrassing. Willing to certainly make the inventory of the damage that we've done, with the idea that we're in fact going to make amends. We may not be willing to make amends as we're making the list, but that's okay. Don't look at 9 when you're doing 8. It will compromise you. Just look at 8. Make the list. We'll talk about it a little bit more deeply in a minute. Notice I have italicized, I've capped in all caps some words there. It's not like that in the big book, but it is like that here for our discussion. All persons harmed. So we need to be very clear on what harm means. Willing, amends, all. Over half of the people that I meet, regardless of how much time they have not done 8 and 9. And if they have begun it, they haven't finished it. And they wonder why their life hasn't changed, why they're still suffering. Most of the people I meet have, in fact, done some work in 4 or 5, probably some 6 and 7. Over half of the people have not done 8 and 9 or have not finished 8 or 9. You can finish the amends. If you get nothing from today other than that comment, believe me, you can finish your amends. Step 8 is pretty straightforward as I've outlined it. I ask people, like the Big Book does, to make a list of who I harmed. I use the word diminish. It's not in the Big Book, but it helps me get around drama. How did I diminish the quality of their life? What did I do? I look at my behavior. So many people, when I ask them about who did they harm, start talking about their behavior. I hope you're hearing this, please. Harms are not about your behavior. What you did is what you did. But it's not a description of harm. What you did is what you did to create the harm. The harm is the impact on other people. That's not a subtle distinction. The impact is the harm, the impact I created on other people by my behavior. Now, I indicate to people that they make this list on 3x5 cards. Not in the Big Book, but it's mechanically something that really helped me the second time I went through the steps. The first time I did it on a consecutive 8x11 piece of paper, and it just got messy as I was making my 9th step. So that second man suggested I do 3x5 cards so that I could organize them and have much more space to make notes and whatever else I needed to do as I was navigating the path of completing my 9th step. Just a suggestion, makes it really easy. 3 pieces of information. That's what I give the men I work with initially. Just those 3 pieces of information. The name of the person and or institution. IRS normally makes it. Catholic Church normally makes it if that's your tradition, or the church of your own culture and family or background. What did I do? What is the behavior? Well, I gossiped. This man challenged me. Herb, you're not that powerful. You're not that important. When you say you gossiped, perhaps you didn't harm the person you gossiped about. Did they lose a job? Did they lose a reputation? Did they lose money? Did they lose an opportunity? You're not that important. You're not that powerful. But perhaps the person that you gossiped to was diminished because it prevented them from going to the other person for either help or a relationship or whatever else they would do. So perhaps gossip didn't harm the person you gossiped about, but it harmed the person you gossiped to. Again, that's not subtle, but I could never have come to that conclusion on my own. I had to have experienced counsel. Again, if you hear nothing else in today's conversation, that's probably the most important one, that I needed, you need, each person needs experienced help with 8 and 9. I don't mean your sponsor. Your sponsor may not know generally about the 8th and 9th step, or they may not have done it specifically themselves, or they may not have a specific experience in the specific area that you're dealing with. For instance, I had harmed a woman by my standards 25 years earlier. And this man who was taking me through the steps said, I don't know anything about that. I have no experience with that. But here's what I suggest is you go to a woman in the program that you trust, that is confidential, and that you believe has experience. And you ask her, number one, if she were the woman that had been harmed by your standards 25 years ago, would she even want you to address it with her today? Or do we just let it be because it's ancient history? Number two, if she says, yes, you should address it, how would you address it? How would she want it if she were the victim of your perpetration? Well, I did. I went to that woman. I sat down with her. It was very embarrassing. And she said, yes, I would want to have it addressed in number 2. This is how I suggested. I'll talk more about that when we get to step 9. But the rest of the story is that that amend went really well, because I dealt with somebody who had experience, who could share their experience with me. But my step guide sponsor had enough humility to tell me that he didn't have any experience in that area. I needed to go find counsel someplace else. Now, the key question for step 8 is, what harm did I cause? It's not, I cheated on my taxes. Well, that's what I did. That's not the harm. I deprived the federal government of a sum of money. That's the harm. Now, whether or not you're inclined in that area is neither here nor there. That's a personal decision on your part in prayer and counsel with your partners, your accountability partners, sponsor, step guide, whoever you're dealing with, maybe your tax attorney. But those are the things that you check out once you've been specific about the harm. Once a person has once a person has completed those cards on step 8, to the extent that I've given them the questions, then I give them the next question. I hope you're hearing this again from a mechanical standpoint. I don't give them the full Megillah the first time, because I don't want them to compromise themselves by looking at what actions they're going to need to take in the amends process. So I give them these first 3 questions so they get very clear and specific about what they did and what harm they caused. Then I give them the question, what specific action is necessary to repair it? You see, they might have spent several weeks or longer on preparing the answer to the first 3 questions. Then they get this question. Now they've got the harms laid out clearly and specifically. So now they can grapple with what specific action is necessary to repair. We can't change history, but we can address it. And then the final question, are you willing? Are you willing? Some people go, yeah, I'm totally willing. I want the freedom. Some people go, well, I'm willing for some of these, but I'm not willing for some of these. And it's a hell no on a 3rd level. There's a hell no. I'll never make, they harmed me much more than I harmed them. Fine, great. I don't get into that debate. Do the ones that you can do. Do the ones that you are willing to do. Maybe categorize them in, yes, I'm willing, category 1. Maybe at some point I will when I'm ready, category number 2. Hell no, that's a category number 3. Do the easy ones first and allow the experience that comes from the practice of doing the easy ones and the grace and power that comes from completing the easy ones to then allow you to evaluate doing the next category of harder ones. And because of the accumulated power and the accumulated willingness, I believe you'll be able to do category 2 and see what happens when you finish those and then address category 3. And I've never seen anybody not come to a conclusion that they are finally willing to do the hell no's. You see, it's a process, that dimmer switch. All right, I'm going to take a little break right here so that we can honor what I said about the questions, if you have any, or the experiences, if you have some, or just the comments that you might have.
I want to say that the reason I keep coming and keep showing up for these last couple of years actually is that and I don't like to raise my hand in the big meeting because I see people get hammered for this. So I'm just gonna throw it down because this is the place I'm at. This is where I'm at today, is that my mind knows all the things, I know all the things, and I'm moving closer to forgiveness, but I have some family trauma that I just don't want to let go of yet. So yeah. I appreciated the discussion you had last week with one of the participants in the big group that, you asked that person, do you want to be free? Do you want to let go of that? But it isn't that I don't want to be free, is that I don't want to let go of that. I mean, it's kind of a generational thing, and, and my life is good, but it's just, so that's why I keep showing up to these, your talks. They're very soothing to me. I like to have a weekend and listen to you because I get something new every single time. I mean, it's crazy. It's very cool.
No, it's actually my experience. Every time I touch it, in fact, I'm having a new experience even today with it, articulating it. So yeah, I get what you're saying exactly. Now, you had indicated that you're not willing to let it go, but here you are listening, here you are now interacting. What's preventing you from being willing?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Oh, no.
I just really want to know, because I just going to keep punishing them.
Well, yeah, all right. Yeah, well, you've heard the Buddha story about,
I did.
We drink poison hoping they'll die.
That other people will die, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it's just up to you. And the question I have asked, and I remember that conversation, is how free do you want to be and how soon? Well,
I want to be free. I want to be free.
You do, but
I feel like, when you talk about that being gently pressed, I just say gently pressed against my quest. And, through your workshops, I've been led into Dr. Berger's workshops and different kind of myriad of experiences. And these things, these little nuggets I'm picking up have changed my life, changed my life significantly. And so when the places in my spirit is becoming healed, the light is really shed on the parts that I don't heal yet. And so I'm becoming more in a place of, I can't have all this light and still have that there, so I'm getting closer and closer and closer to it. Yeah.
You know what? That's exactly right. Show up, do the best you can. And this last year, I've actually changed my attitude toward, Bill says in the big book, half measures will avail us nothing. It's kind of like, I understand the spirit of that, but it's not my experience. I did the best I could. By my standards later on, it was really 25, 30%, but it was the best I could do at the time. So rather than discourage the perfectionists, I'm with you. I'm saying, do the best you can, show up even with unwillingness is really what you've expressed. I've got some personal reasons that I'm holding on to this and I'm not willing to let it go. So the question, and this is rhetorical, that I'm asking you to challenge yourself with, what is the benefit being served to you by holding on to this history? Yep, it's a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer it, but to me, but it would be a wonderful question for you to allow to bubble in you.
It's bubbling, and I in my morning meditation, in my I give it to my higher power. And I also believe that the prayers, sometimes, it's like I keep saying these prayers over and over and over, but every time you pray, that's a direct link to an energy. It is. Every time I pray to have Creator take these things for me, and every time I pray to do, let me walk on your path today and keep me in a straight line to that, and not be, looking for ways to help people. Being really reflective of how I'm treating people. If there's something that I've done, and I reflect faster. It's like yesterday, I was just like, I was all zen, did my thing. And then I went to the store and there was too many people in there. And I was like, release the Kraken, man. And then on the way home, I was like, dude, you have to kind of pray about that now. Put the Kraken back. These people they were just showing up wanting to get through a lunch hour too. And, you're not the queen of the lunch hour in the store, man. But Herb, I really appreciate you, and I appreciate. I just really appreciate you. You rock, man.
Well, good. I'm glad, and you're in it. What you're reminding me of is another awareness I had just this last year with the group, and that is sharings like yours. Oh, people who show up, don't participate, don't do any of the assignments, but they show up and they listen, have an experience. They have an experience. I'm getting the feedback from lots of people that said, Herb, I've attended your workshops for 5 years, more or less regularly, more or less consistently, but I've never done any of the work, but my life has improved because I'm listening to people, real people, talk about real life, and somehow I'm absorbing that. So cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, as you will recall from recent events, I know you're very busy, but on Thursday night, I was saying, no one can make me angry, which is a statement of fact. Fact. Yeah. Nobody can make you angry. You get angry on your own.
Right.
Right. They're just doing what they're doing. Right.
Yeah.
So then the very next day at work, I get angry. I don't say anything. I'm very good at covering. I'm not, going to be angry outwardly. But I get angry and I'm thinking, okay, maybe if I just rephrase it, the guy didn't make me angry. He did something that caused me to be, that's the same thing.
It is.
So I've got some work to do.
Well, the question for you is, what was the button that he pushed in you that released the Kraken? To follow up with the prior caller, a great phrase, right?
Great phrase. I just you'll have to excuse me for jumping up and down and at the beginning of this meeting, in and out of the video, stepping in and out, and also this year I've got the habit of like blanking my video off and doing so. I'm still listening. It's not like I'm going away. And I just feel like
apologize to me. Do anything you want.
I just feel like I'm being rude when I do that. But we did.
You're assuming that I'm paying attention. I ignore you.
That's it. Of course you are. I'm a very important person. We all are. That's how we came to be alcoholics.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's why we're working on deflating that ego at depth. Which,
stop working on it because you're powerless.
Yeah, you're powerless. Yeah, I get it, man. Step one is my touchstone now. It's like realize, I can't change me. You can't change me.
Right.
If there's any change that's going to happen, it's going to come from a mechanism or something that lies outside of us. And that's it.
Well, you show up, you take some action, you listen sort of, and you take some action sort of, and you hope that there's this energy that's going to light up the middle spot, because there's where the mystery is. I can't make it happen, but I hope it will happen. And sometime when I look over my shoulder, I see that it has happened. I still can't explain it.
Now, I'll tell you, I will say this, and I'm just going to close off here, because 8 and 9, I only have a few things for 8, but to me, they're huge.
Yes.
I mean, one of them to anybody, I think, would be huge. And I can't even explain what happened when it happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't need to explain it.
No, I just need to deal with the harm done. Just determine if there's harm done, and then just deal with it and make amends the best that I possibly can.
Make sure you get counsel and guidance.
I still got to look for that, man. My my sponsor's like a red hot ball of furious weasels on the inside, and you can't even see it. It's just weird. And he's been in the program forever.
Well, you might find somebody who can provide some guidance for you as you appreciate what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, I like him as a sponsor though, because he's the kind of person that would ordinarily that pushes my buttons, so he helps me find my buttons.
Great. I had a sponsor for 28 years that was an amazing sponsor. He just didn't know jack about the steps. So I had to go outside him in order to get the steps done. But I had total respect for him as a man of uncommon common sense. So yeah, we go where the water is. Don't go to dry wells.
Every sponsor that I've had has had a very important part in this process,
Good.
Even if they were not my sponsor for long.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has just been this is just bizarre. I got to tell you, if only this were like integral calculus class, okay, I could do that.
Well, some people make it that complex, and I try not to. I try to make it complex. Simple math. 1 + 1 = 2. Your willingness and God's grace, listen to the suggestions and do the best you can.
But algebra and mathematics, these aren't complex because they're just facts and you just learn them. You're not expected to walk out of class any different than you came in, other than you know the math.
Well, see, now you're projecting your experience with it.
Yeah.
Even though we have a small group, I'm confident there are people in the group that go, yeah, no, that's not my experience with algebra and geometry.
Well, or anything that isn't, because there's a spiritual aspect to this program. I mean, that's basically the big thing. And right. So this is, it's just different because you're supposed to walk out of the classroom different than when you walked in. And so this is what's taking me so long. It's just a completely unfamiliar thing to me.
What's the rush? There's no rush. There's no place to go.
You got that right, man.
As I said in my meditation book, the journey is the destination.
And quite a journey it's been.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. All right. So I'm going to wrap up step 8. Step 8 serves like a roadmap. Now, you have the cards that tells you where you're going. It tells you where you are, and it tells you when you're done. Because you have cards, and you check them off. And the ones that aren't checked off, you still have to do. Oh, excuse me. You're still invited to do. You don't have to do anything. So it's like a roadmap. It's an accountability partner. Now, I also had a step guide that I reported into once a week. This is what I did. This is what I plan on doing. This is what I did. This is what I didn't do. This is what I plan on doing. And I was rigorously honest in the weekly call. And it took months for me to finish my 9th step. Not because of any delay, although there was some. I think you recognize at one point that I had gone to him after some time, and he said, well, where have you been? It's been a month since you checked in. And I said, well, I've been really busy. My life is so full. The promises are manifesting. He says, well, how are you doing on your amends process? And I go, well, I showed him the sheet, and I said, well, I'm doing really good. I made 6 amends. He said, well, when's the last time you made one? Well, a month ago. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, but I'm willing, I said. I'm really willing, but I'm really busy. And he said, willingness without action is fantasy. Willingness without action, just a delusion. Well, I got real busy because I was suffering. That's why I was talking to him. I had called him. And I did 3 amends within the next 3 days, and the suffering went away because I was back into action, which then reinforced the motivation to finish the amends, which I then did that first time. That's the one I recognized that I had had that radical change when I looked back over my shoulder. He was very helpful because he allowed me to dress rehearse some of the more important ones, the one to my wife and the one to my daughters. He played the role of my wife. He played the role of each daughter. And I literally dress rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it, the order I would say it. So I got a sense of the feelings of the words, the feelings of the phrases, how to articulate it, how to reword it perhaps. And he would give me some suggestions. And I had a sense of the feelings like I would have and that kind of thing, which really then made me real prepared to have an effective conversation when I was making those amends, which we'll talk about in the next session on step 9. Now, Bill gives us an explanation of both steps 8 and 9 in pages 76 to 83. It's the first and the last time that he combines 2 steps together. There's no need to do that in the sense that they're quite different. Step 8 is a list and inventory, and step 9 is action, actually directing your behavior to repairing the damage. But he chose to probably because it helps showing some examples of what he meant. He sets the stage in the beginning, very clearly says, we're not doing this to make us happy. Although we're attempting to clean up our life, that's a secondary priority here. The primary, he says that on page 77, I believe, the primary purpose of doing this is to make ourselves useful to God and the people around us. Again, that reinforcing that commitment made in step 3, that turning. Step 3, made a decision to turn my will and my life. Well, turn from what to what? Step 3 is about a decision to have a relationship with power because I don't have sufficient power to live my life properly. I saw that in step 1, not only with regard to my addiction, powerless, but with regard to my unmanageability, no choice. No choice. I will always choose me on my own power. That's the whole point of pages 60 to 62. I will always choose me on my own power. I'm self-centered, and that's the root of my problem. Step 2 is merely the hope that there is a power that can help me. Step 3 is a commitment to have a relationship with that power and to trust that it will help me if I do a few of the things that are suggested. Take a deep look at myself in inventory, steps 4 through 7, and see that I'm very human. My behavior is self-centered motives, that my thoughts are delusional, and that my behavior comes from unhealthy coping strategies, steps 6 and 7. And that again, I'm powerless over those, but I can pray, step 7. And my interpretation and experience is I can hold myself accountable because I'm responsible. I am praying because I'm powerless over my inclination, step 6. I can pray because I have free will in order to ask for help, but I also need accountability. I'm powerless over my inclination, but I'm 100% responsible for the behavior that comes from it. It's not in the big book that way, but it's implied. And it's certainly my experience. I am powerless over my inclinations, instincts, but I'm 100% responsible for the behavior they manifest. And so I hold myself accountable, as I indicated, weekly or biweekly or monthly, whatever it is, no less than daily, no more frequently than no less than monthly, no more frequently than daily, and someplace in between. And depending on the cycle and the substance, you all will work that out in prayer and in conversation. I'm responsible for the behavior, but I'm praying for a change in my inclination. And then those unhealthy coping strategies, those default positions, 6 and 7, manifest in behavior. And that's why we're now looking at steps 8 and 9, inventorying the behavior and its impact on others, and then going to go clean it up. If this is the first time, then you start with the simple ones. Direct. Bill gives some examples of indirect. Writing a letter is somewhat indirect, although it's fairly direct. A real example of indirect is where I can't find them. In the day 1988, 89, we didn't have internet and that kind of resource to actually perhaps do better investigative work. Which I did the best I could, and there were people that I just couldn't find because I didn't even know their names, but I knew I'd harmed them. Or perhaps they went out of business because I was a thief and I stole from different organizations. Or perhaps the conclusion was that I shouldn't address them directly, either because it's been too long and it's not that important that I address them directly, or that it would be inappropriate to disturb their lives in my own personal process, that it would be inappropriate to make contact with a woman who now, perhaps 25 years later, is married with children and etc. And it would just not be appropriate. But then again, as I mentioned earlier today, where there had been harms done by my definition to a woman of 25 years earlier, I was counseled to open up that can of worms and to address it. So there's no formula here other than pray and talk to an experienced person and then come to a decision. That's the formula. Pray so that you get direction. Talk to an experienced person so that you get some real practical advice based on experience, knowledge and experience. I went to accountants. I went to attorneys. I went to therapists. I went to insurance specialists. In the program, we have a nice variety of specialties in the program. People who knew what I was doing, but they also had a background in the area that I was doing it. And they were able to give me very specific and informed direction based on their understanding of the area as well as their experience in making amends. My sponsor didn't know much. My step guide didn't have the panoramic view of all of the kinds of amends experiences that I was needing to address. But he was very clear on the process of amends. Now, this isn't outlined this clearly as a formula in the big book, but this was his experience. And then I used that formula to become my experience. And he said, first of all, you call them on the phone and you ask to have an appointment with them. And my particular script was, this is Herb, and we had this relationship, or we met at this time, or etc. That was our exposure, and I'm reviewing my life. And I'm taking a look at, I want to clean up my life and become a better person. And I'm looking at all the relationships where I may have created harm. or I did some damage, and your name came up in that research. I'd like to get together with you to talk about that if you have an interest. Some people said, sure, and let's get together Wednesday at 3 o'clock or whatever it was. Others said, well, no, I'm really not going to spend any time with you, but if you want to talk to me on the phone. So be prepared to make the amend on the phone. From my standpoint, that's a direct amend. Even though it's not face-to-face, it's on the phone. A letter might, in fact, be a form of direct amend, although I recommend the same approach. That is, if you haven't been able to contact them or you want to be able to contact them, then send them a letter indicating the same information. Would you like then to have a conversation with me about that? Would you prefer a personal meeting? Would you prefer Zoom? Would you prefer, today we would have that. Would you prefer a telephone? And see what their response is, because what we don't want to do is misuse their time or put the burden on them because we want to be free. You see, we really take into consideration them and their feelings and their outlook and their needs and their time. Not about us anymore. Although indirectly, of course, it is. We want to be free. As the big book I mentioned says on page 77, that's the secondary motive. The first motive is I want to be useful. I want to help other people. And by the time you get to the 9th step, perhaps you've had that radical reorganization that makes it true for you, that you want to be helpful. It's an organic thing. It's not something that we put on like my monk's robe I did in 1957. And 7 years later, in 1964, I took it off. Well, when I put it on, monks meditate. When I took it off, I'm not a monk, so I don't meditate. Well, that makes no sense. But it was my particular approach to life. Everything came to me from the outside: rules, regulations, commands, stipulations, civilized behavior, spiritual behavior, psychological behavior. It all came from the outside. And I put it on like a shirt. And when I didn't want to wear the shirt anymore, or I wanted a different color shirt, I took it off because it didn't come from the inside. It all came from the outside. I'm that chameleon. If the environment is green, I will turn green to fit in. If the environment is yellow, I will turn yellow to fit in. Once I did these steps, it came from the inside. I was able to identify, especially in the 4th column of the resentment inventory and in the 9th question of the sex inventory. The 4th column concluded I'm responsible 100% for my reactions. That wasn't information, that was an experience. I'm 100% responsible for my reactions. I don't have a part in my reaction. I have 100%. I'm not a victim, I'm a perpetrator. Every time, every time, every time. No exceptions. Oh my God, people hate that. No exceptions. And then in the sex inventory, that 9th question, it's not about sex. It's about the principles. What should I have done instead? And I identified a principle. Oh, how about be rigorously honest? Oh, how about consider their needs? Oh, how about be sensitive to what they want? How about fidelity? See, and then I was able to identify inside of me the principles that I have that I wasn't using, or the principles that decent people have that I didn't even have. And I was able to then uncover the principles I had, to dust them off and begin to use them, or even to adopt the principles that I didn't have that I was convinced would make me a decent person, because I wanted to be a decent person. All my life, I've wanted to be a decent person. Up until age 48, I had the delusion that I was. I thought I was a Renaissance man. Oh yeah, with my background, 4 years sober, I was very, very clear I was a Renaissance man. Until I did the fourth step and discovered I was a Neanderthal. And that changed everything, that radical awakening, that turning from inside to outside, that turning from outside to inside, that spiritual awakening, that turning from my self-centeredness, narcissistic actually, diagnosable, to other-centered. A spiritual orientation. Are we human beings seeking a spiritual experience or spiritual beings seeking a human experience? After weeks of meditation, I got an answer. Yes. Yes, both. Like the two sides of one coin. Heads and tails are not two different coins. They're just the different sides of the same coin. I can be other-centered God and other-centered people. And that for me will be the true sense of myself being centered. I didn't say self-centered. Myself being centered as I live having those two sides, my relationship with God in 11 and my relationship with others in 12. Developing those principles deep inside myself so that I am who I am wherever I am, no matter who's watching and no matter what the circumstances are. So the counsel was to describe the harm once I got them on the phone or in the coffee shop or in a park, wherever, or in their home or my home, wherever we met, they agreed to meet. I would describe the harm as I see it, short. I mean, I don't mean a long story, please, no long stories. A short description. I stole $20,000. That's not my story, but I'm just saying as an example. We don't need a context. We don't need any context. We don't need any story. Describe the harm. And then ask, is there anything else that I did that harmed you that you would like to talk about? Please hear the phrase, that you would like to talk about. Because there are some people who are very shy and or want it over with because they're very uncomfortable, or they just want to let bygones be bygones. We don't press them to have a long conversation. This is not about therapy. This is not about catharsis. This is a process of repairing damage. Keep in mind why you're there. Is there anything else? Now, in the case of my two daughters, who at that time were in program, still are, and knew quite a bit about the process, although they were relatively new in it, like we all were. They were very prepared when I asked for the appointment. And I did it separately. Some people ask that question. Should I do my family all together since it was all together? And I typically recommend that you do it one at a time. Of course, there are circumstances where you might want to meet with your father and mother together, but maybe only after you've met with them separately. There's no rules here. There's no formula here. How can I help? This is the criteria. This is the filter through which you look. How can I help? How can I be most useful to this person? And when I said to either of my daughters, both of my daughters, each of my daughters, is there anything else that you would like to talk about? 2 hours later, it might have been an hour and a half. It might have been longer than 2, but it was a good long session where they discussed their impression of growing up in an alcoholic home. Both my wife and I were alcoholics. She got sober first, and I followed her, and she died 5 years ago, still sober and active in her program with her sponsor. And as a result of this process in 1988, when I made my amends, which I'll talk about in a minute, we were able to rehabilitate our marriage. At that point, 18 years, married, 19 years. Just a very difficult time, the last 10 years while we were drinking and the first 4 years of my recovery, our recovery. But we were able to restore and rehabilitate a relationship in which we became really, really, really good friends. I trusted her with my soul. She was my sounding board and my partner. So then we suggest the amends. Going back to that gross example, I stole $20,000. I'm going to write you a check for $20,000, or if I can't write the check, okay if I pay you $25 a week or $25 a month, whatever it is you can do. Again, there's no formula here. In prayer and in direction with your sponsor step guide, you determine what is the doable. What is the doable? What can you do? What will you do? That's a formula that I do use. What can you do? What will you do? Those are two different questions. And we suggest the amends. Notice I use the term suggest. We don't tell them what we're going to do. That might be quite harmful. But we suggest, I'm going to pay the money back and I can pay you $100 a month. Well, they might say, yes, and it's been 20 years, so I want compound interest. And then we consider that. And my recommendation is, yes, that's a legitimate request. We don't always need to do what they ask us to do. I had a man who was divorced about 20 years. His ex would not even return his phone calls when this was back in the 90s, when we didn't have any type of Facebook or electronics. And so finally, I suggested that he put it in writing. He make an amends to her in writing and ask if she would be willing to see him. And he sent, well, first of all, I vetted the letter. Please don't let any sponsee, or don't you send any letter without it being vetted by your sponsor or some experienced person, because embedded in there in our early recovery, we're not mentally, emotionally very balanced, could be some fairly harmful or passive aggressive statements that we're not conscious of because we're still saturated with resentment. So I read the letter, suggested some changes. He made the changes. He sent the letter. A week later, he got a call from her. Said, I'm willing to see you. So it had been 20 years, and he went to see her. At the end of a conversation in which he followed this direction, he said, is there any other amend that I can make? And she, without hesitation, said, yes, you can write me a check for $25,000 and we'll call it even. Well, it really startled him, but he had poise enough to pause. And he said, well, let me pray about that and talk to my sponsor about that, and I'll get back to you. And we did talk about it. And we determined that he had paid alimony, he had paid child support, he had had an appropriate division of assets at the time, and that he actually didn't owe her any money. So she was blackmailing him, of course, misusing this process for her own benefit. That's why she's the ex-wife. But anyway, editorial comment. So I said to him, call her and hope you get her machine and leave a message. I will not be responding to your request. That's simple. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to expand on it. You just need to deliver a very direct, succinct message. You don't have to do what they say if, in fact, it belies common sense. Now, again, this is where a sponsor and a step guide come in very, very importantly. Let's stop here and see if there are any questions or concerns or comments about step 9 and perhaps your experiences with it and or your questions about something that you did or didn't do and perhaps are considering.
So back in the days when I was using in the 80s, I owed a babysitter a lot of money. I'm sure she is no longer, she was an older lady. And when I first, I worked through my steps about 8 or 9 years ago and addressed that. And I still feel really shitty about it. I mean, it's just, so I'm concerned that maybe I didn't do what I was supposed to do if I have residual feelings about it. And also, second question is, how do you make an amends to somebody that's not safe to do so in person? So I guess I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on that concept of indirect amends, perhaps, if you have a minute to do that.
Oh, yeah, no, that's exactly what we're doing here. So let's take the babysitter first. Did you make any attempt at amends to that person?
She was not, I did not have her address. It was, I knew what city she lived in, but she was in her 70s at the time. So the likelihood that she was no longer with us was significant.
Right.
And so what I did was, and what I still do, because I'm sure I have more in my past of people I ripped off that I can't remember just because of, the state of mind I was in at the time, because I didn't give a shit. So, is I do things for recovering people. I support youth it's an ongoing thing that I do. It's not like, so I feel like that has been addressed with that. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could have found her. I mean, she was one of those people in my child's life that she would because I was not there. Yeah.
Well, but at this point, that's where forgiveness is so important, is you need to now release her. You need to release your guilt. You need to release your shame. You need to release your discomfort, because you are, in a way, compensating for it, not directly to her, because she's probably dead, as you say, but you're taking care of something differently where there is a need, and you're providing either your service or your resources or your money or something like that in different situations. Now, you want to make sure, from my standpoint, that it's at this present moment that it's rather proportional to what the dollar amount was. And I don't mean to be, I'm not an accountant, so we don't keep specific track of it. But for instance, I'll use the term, I guess, abusive to women, not in the physical sense, but in the way I used them. And how do you make amends to women that you can't find or you shouldn't find, et cetera, like that? And the overall kind of attitude and the volume of it. I became part of the board of a women's recovery home, and I've been on that board in some capacity, not dealing with the women, but helping with fundraising and policy and organizational stuff and that kind of thing for over 30 years. That's my way of making an indirect amend to this other sort of unapproachable. Does that make sense? That's
yes.
Kind of what you're doing.
Yes, but I haven't done that, I don't think. So yeah. I might be overcompensating financially, but I don't know, across the board, I have resources that, I'm very blessed with resources. And if there's a way for me to help other people with my resources, I just do that anyway. It's just, as long as makes my heart happy. There. But in her, it's just this woman in particular, because she was amazing to my child, when I think about her, I still have that. And there's other parts of that process that even though I have done the work, I still have that that feeling that, that I don't know.
There's several things I want to suggest. Number one, for people that I couldn't find or shouldn't find, I created a prayer practice. If it was a light touch damage, maybe I would pray 3 days for their healing. If it was heavier, damage, maybe a month of daily prayer for their healing. If it was longer than that, I had relationships that perhaps were not appropriate for perhaps 20, 25 years. Then I would pray longer period, but I would quantify it for myself so that I know when I'm done. It's not an open-ended thing. See, I think yours is part of it is it's open-ended. So there's never any closure to it.
Yeah, there's no, yeah. It's
So,
just like, yeah.
So perhaps, number one, you could make a determination as to what is the potential financial impact of what you cheated her out of, if you will, and then make a periodic and or a lump sum contribution to a retirement community for women. Or even more demanding on you is make contact with a retirement home for women and ask if there's something that they need and or something that you could do to support them for a week or a month or for a year type thing. So that there's a concrete action on your part proportionate to the damage that was done, but with a conclusion so that you bring it to, I'm done now. When I prayed for the people that I couldn't find or shouldn't find, I had a specific time limit. And when I was done with the time limit, I was done and I was free.
I like that very much.
Yeah.
I like that very much. And tonight, when I'm doing my kind of the end of my day thing, I'm going to really reflect on that and make a list. And I like the idea about the cards too. That's pretty cool.
There's no rush though. There's no rush.
No.
Allow it to bubble.
No.
Allow it to bubble. You'll know when you're being invited to move forward. Yeah. No, that's yeah.
It's cool.
No, that's really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb.
You bet. How do you make amends to dead people? Well, I didn't know, but the man who I worked with did. He said, your father is dead. He wasn't buried because he was cremated. His ashes were spread. So I recommend that you go to the local cemetery as a symbol of visiting with your dead father. And you sit there with a pad of paper and a pencil, pen, jug of water, because you're going to be there for a while, and a box of Kleenex, because I know you, Herb, you're a crier. And I did that. I went to the local cemetery, and I didn't prepare for it. I went there and I prayed for his spirit to be present. And then I began the process. I described the harm. And then I asked, is there anything else that I did that needs to be addressed? In writing. And then I wrote out the amends that I was suggesting. And I wrote out the question, is there anything else? So I wrote it all out as if my father was there. But here's, I do believe, what brought me over the goal line, the goal line of being completed, is I read it. After writing for an hour or so, all of this amends to my father, I read it out. Well, that's when I needed the Kleenex. Reading it out loud was a total different experience than writing it out. And I got to that last question and I paused. Is there anything else that you would request of me? And I heard a very distinct voice. It said, take care of your mother. All right, I left that cemetery a free person, free of a volcanic rage that I'd had for him since I was 18 years old. I couldn't have dealt effectively. I didn't deal with it effectively in therapy or any other step process or any other human development process. But when I walked out of that cemetery, praying for the removal of deep resentment. That's the prayer in between column 3 and column 4 in the big book, pages 66 and 67, if you're not familiar with it. So you can walk and chew gum. You're doing all of this at once, and I'm coming to conclusion with the 9th step. I walked out free. But I knew that, in fact, my mother, who was an untreated Al-Anon, meaning she had the codependency and had never addressed it, had gotten very angry with me at one point, a story for a different day, about money. She said she loaned it to me. I was very clear that she had given me a gift. But be that as it may, her circumstances had changed, and so had her story about it, and she wanted her money back. And she was so angry, I did pay her back, but she was so angry about the whole situation that she sold everything and moved out of state with no forwarding address. Yeah, just ran away from home at age 67. No forwarding address, had been very close to our 3 children. She was the grandmother of supreme delight. She was the best friend to my wife and probably liked her better than she liked me. And but she just disappeared, and she'd been gone for a couple of years. I didn't know where she was. So because of the work that I did, I had connections with the Teamsters Union, and she got a monthly check, my mother, from the Teamsters, because my dad, who had died, had been a Teamster and had a retirement income. And so I went to the head of the Teamsters and I said, this is the situation. I don't know where my mother is, but you do. You send her a check. Here's a letter. Would you send it with her, with the check? I don't want to know where she is. I'm not asking you that. I just ask you to forward the letter. And they said, of course they would. And they did. Well, 2 weeks later, I got the letter back. The letter was written in the form I've described in terms of amend. And as an added bonus, Bill suggests we put money in it. I didn't. I put the pictures of the grandkids in it. And she was very close to the grandkids. The letter returned, had been opened, had been read. She was still so angry that she returned the pictures of the kids. Heartbreaking. But I had ended that letter by saying, if there's anything else that I could do for you, please let me know. And 2 years later, I got a phone call. Herb, I received that letter. You said you're willing to help. Is that still good? I said, yeah, Mom. Hi, welcome back. And she said, I've been diagnosed with cancer. I'll be dead in 6 months. I need to come home and clean it up. Would you be willing to help me? And of course we did. We brought her back to my home. We kept her there until just medically we couldn't deal with it any longer. We put her in a support group where she died eventually. But on a daily basis, we met with her on a daily basis. The ice thawed, and on a daily basis, she reconciled with every family member. Her kids, her cousins, her grandchildren, etc. How do you get here from there? Dead people, people you can't find, people that's the pain and the suffering and the damage is so dramatic. Amazing, amazing stories. The most dramatic, of course, is with my wife. I indicated that a little earlier. I had had a history of infidelity, and she didn't know the details, but she knew the facts. And the big book is very clear. I think it's page 81. If they don't know, don't tell. That's my interpretation of what it says. If they do know in a general way, admit in a general way. If they know all of the specifics, it says you might want to take a different road and let bygones be bygones. Now, fortunately, I had a step guide who had a similar background and a similar value and a similar family and a similar drinking, a similar career experience and a similar recovery experience. I was very fortunate. And he had healed his family situation that was parallel to mine. And he looked at that material on pages 81 and 82, and he said, she knows in a general way, so admit in a general way, but don't give her any details. Because, and the big book acknowledges that it's fodder for the jealousy mill, and it doesn't help in terms of once you've said it, the imagination can't be put back in the box. So admit in a general way, commit to fidelity, ask for forgiveness. But here's what's on page 82, I believe it is. The big book suggests that we pray together. His interpretation was he prayed with his wife on a daily basis. They were committed to the marriage. They were committed to the value of family. They were committed to the 12-step program and the possibility of healing through the power of the Spirit. And as we were very parallel to that. And he said this was the practice. We got on our knees. Big book doesn't say that. But his experience was we got on our knees to get our attention. We don't get on our knees to get God's attention. It's an act of humility, an act of subordination, an act of supplication, asking for help. And we held hands, a sign of an attempt at intimacy, an attempt at communication, an attempt at rehabilitation of a relationship. And we prayed out loud, and we looked in each other's eyes. The first day he said, I prayed out loud for guidance and healing. No formula, no editorial comments, no addressing the past, no addressing the future, no asking for forgiveness. Nope. Very simple phrase. Pray for guidance and healing. And the next morning, we got on our knees and held hands and looked in each other's eyes. Scary stuff. It's so intimate. It was like, I've never been so intimidated, and I was a monk. I'm very used to praying and praying in groups, but never so intimate, privately, one-on-one, holding hands, looking in the eyes, praying out loud. And she prayed out loud for guidance and healing. After about a week, we began over our coffee talk to address this. And we both agreed that the heat had gone down. And we continued that practice for 3 years, daily. Anytime we felt a bump in the road, we would reenact that practice. But our relationship healed. But that's the forgiveness process, the forgiveness of a decision to release it and a process of releasing it over time. It's not a light switch like, oh yeah, I decide and now it's done. And by Sunday, I'm good, right? No, by someday, I'm good, but not by Sunday. Play on words, I hope you appreciate that. Powerful. And for the 30 years before she died, 30 plus, our life was a wonderful journey of partners and companion. As I said earlier, I trusted her with my money, I trusted her with my children, but mostly I trusted her with my soul. Balancing the scales. Chuck C. in his book, A New Pair of Glasses, has a great image. He said he uses the Lady Justice. You know, the blind lady standing on a pillar with a scale? Lady Justice. We're trying to balance the scale. We can't change the history, but we can address it. We can rehabilitate it. We can allow people the dignity of healing by either being acknowledged and or by having a conversation about it, and or perhaps the actual physical material retribution, reparation. Which brings us to the entire process of sharing, of forgiveness, a process again. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It's a dimmer switch. It's a process. Very, 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 very progressive process. It begins with a decision, though, just like step 3 does. There's no action, but there's action implied. Step 3 is a commitment to steps 4 through 9. By the end of the 9th step, I do believe we've experienced the forgiveness process, but it begins with step 4. It's a decision to release them. You might not have that consciousness at the beginning, but you will inevitably have that consciousness at the end when you're reviewing steps 8 and 9 with a sponsor and or a step guide or your companion with regard to the forgiveness process, a decision to release them. But paradoxically, we realize that we are released, as I mentioned. Listen to the St. Francis prayer. We are forgiven to the extent we forgive them. Listen to the Lord's Prayer. We are released from our debt to the extent that we release them from their debt. The Lord's Prayer written 2,000 years ago, the St. Francis prayer written 200 years ago. Different circumstances, different cultures, different time frames, but this very same dynamic, because it's a human dynamic. To the extent that we release them, we are released. It's just one of those paradoxes, a mystery that I talked about earlier. But it's not any of the words that you see on the screen. It's not to condone. A lot of people are unwilling to forgive because they feel that they're condoning the behavior. No, we're not condoning it. We're condemning it, actually. It's not an invitation to forget, forgive and forget. Absolutely not. I mean, if you can and you want to, it's fine. But that's not inherent in the forgiveness process. Remember, so that you don't allow that to be done to you again. Don't tolerate poor behavior. Don't ignore purview. Don't approve it. Don't excuse it. Don't minimize it. Absolutely not. Those are all functions of codependency, which is a very unhealthy, neurotic relationship with people. We don't have the power of pardon. We're not the warden. We're not God. In fact, the big book suggests that we quit playing God. I believe it's on page 60 or 61. That's the first recommendation in step 3. Quit playing God. Now, none of us would acknowledge that we play God from a consciousness standpoint. But if you read pages 60 to 62 and you apply it personally, you will see that all of us are the director. We write the script and we want everybody to follow the script and read the script and understand the script and adhere to the script, please. My script. I wonder what you call that. Oh, playing God. It's not about denial or absolving them. We don't have that power. We need to stay conscious. It's not actually about reconciling. Please hear that. Forgiveness doesn't mean you let them back in your life. Absolutely not. Even family members. I know lots of people who have decided their family is just too sick. They can't be part of their family. They have created other families with friends and or with the fellowship. Insanity, doing the same thing over again, expecting different results. No, we're not inviting them to hurt us again. We have definite boundaries. Not for them. That's not our job. We're not God. We have boundaries for ourselves, how to protect ourselves or surrender justice. Well, what does that mean? I sponsored a guy whose father he discovered in a 12-step program, his father had molested his 2 daughters. Well, he worked the steps. He got through the 9th step. He went through the forgiveness process. He loves his father. He loved his father. He forgave his father, but he also turned him over to the authorities. And his father was judged guilty and sent to prison at age 68 for 6 years. He put his father in prison, not to punish him, but to show his daughters that what grandpa did was not all right. He still visits his father, but his father is not allowed to visit his home or to be with his daughters. He doesn't surrender justice, but he doesn't stay angry. He released his dad. Doesn't mean that you need to reconcile with anybody if you don't choose to. He chose to reconcile with his father on his terms. Forgiveness is a decision to not retaliate or exact revenge or seek compensation or judge them. Well, what is forgiveness then? I've said what it's not. It's a decision to release. Oh my God, look at my hand. I have a clenched fist for those of you who are not looking at the screen. It's a decision to release them and my hand opens. That's as simple as it gets. Now, it doesn't happen because you open your hand and it's an immediate process because you made the decision. No, it's a process. It might take days or weeks or months or even years sometimes. Read Fred Luskin's book. I mentioned it earlier, Forgive for Good. Once you've done a 4th step in the big book, with the guidance of somebody who knows what they're doing in unpacking column 3 and column 4, once you've done that, you are ready to read and benefit from Fred Luskin's book from a psychological standpoint. There's no spirituality. There's no 12 step. That's not his exposure at all or his intent. His intent is to expose and give to the people a benefit of the psychological human development process of forgiveness, but it totally parallels steps 4 through 9, and which I'll show you in a minute. A decision to release them and to release ourselves and to be released. This is Fred Luskin's process. He suggests we name it. Well, isn't that what we're doing in steps 4 and 8 especially? Our hurt, especially column 3 of the resentment inventory. We need to understand it. Column 4 of the resentment inventory. Step 6 in the character defects. Step 8 in identifying the harms done and the motives behind that and the implications and impact of that. What was I hoping for? Identify the rules, column 3 in the resentment inventory. What are my beliefs? Oh my God, I was so embarrassed. I had rules, I had a script about life and about you and about me, and it was all a delusion. Unenforceable rules, he calls it. That's a wonderful phrase that he has. We create unenforceable rules for people, even for ourselves, of course, because forgiveness can be applied to yourself. Eventually, you will discover once you forgive others, you will experience the very fact that you are releasing yourself, forgiving yourself. We don't start with ourselves because we're always starting with ourselves as addicts, but we end up with a healthy relationship with self. That was the indication from the chart I showed you in terms of the step process. Those first 3 steps are relationship with life, power, light. The next 4 steps are relationship with myself. And the next 2 or 3 steps, if you want to include step 10, our relationship with other people. Acknowledging reality. This was the process of steps 4 through 9. I got in touch with reality as it is, not as the script that I wrote. My attitude of humility, my attitude of gratitude, my attitude of dealing with reality as it is, rather than as I project onto outside world. To take responsibility, to accept reality as it is. It's my decision. I want to live as a decent person. I want to live objectively in reality as it is, not as I've constructed it, or not even as I perceive it. I need a new pair of glasses. I need my lenses ground, or I need cataract surgery. Lots of metaphors there. Lots of sample ways of approaching it. A new pair of glasses. Chuck C's name of the book that he published based on the retreat that he did back in the 60s, a stag retreat that was recorded, A New Pair of Glasses. I really recommend that book, just because it's a man's journey through the steps as he describes his transformation, many wisdom sayings and wisdom experiences. And we then implement the decision. See, willingness without action is fantasy. Action is the magic word. Action is the magic word. Thoughts are good. Feelings are good. Memory's good. Imagination's good. Emotions are good. All of it's part of our human, but nothing happens until action in terms of change. We cannot think our way into change. We cannot feel our way into change. We can't imagine our way into change. All of those will help. But now it's science. If you haven't been exposed to or read material from Dan Siegel, S-I-E-G-E-L, he's a medical doctor, a psychiatrist at UCLA, who has spent his career researching the brain. 20 years ago, we did not know that we could change our brain. We thought the brain was a static unit, but once it grows to its full maturity at age 25, that all you can do is have it disintegrate. Well, it's not true. The brain can change, but it can't change from reading and getting knowledge. It can't change in therapy from getting feelings and expressing them. The only way the brain changes physiologically and biologically, physiologically, I hope you're hearing me, the brain can change when we change our behavior. We have what's called synapses. I'm not going to give you a teaching on the brain because I couldn't do it, but I understand that there are synapses in the brain neural system. And at the end of each of the neuronal pathways, these synapses wire together when we behave, when we take action. They will wire together. And he has created the phrase, synapses that fire together, wire together. They create new habits. They create new neuronal pathways, which over time becomes a habit. We can change when we behave differently. Oh my God, that's such what we say in the program, isn't it? If you've been around any time, and maybe even your sponsor's one of those wisdom people that says, I don't care what you think, I don't care what you know, I don't care how you feel, I do care how you do. Contrary actions. And when we take actions, our thinking changes. And when we take actions, our feelings change. And over time, when we're consistent, we create habits and our life changes. It's really powerful to implement the decision. That's what we're talking about here. We have a decision in step 3, which is a commitment to action, but the actions are completing steps 4 through 9, completing step 9, finishing step 9. I had a wonderful conversation earlier with Angel concerning bringing things to closure. Measurable, visible, objective closure. Not a fantasy, not a thought, not a feeling, not a blah, 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 blah. No, literally, on paper or in your conversation with somebody who holds you accountable, bringing it to closure, bringing it to completion. And you know that you're done. Forgiveness is a process, an experience. They are released. Then I am released. It's an amazing experience of freedom. I started out that way. Step 8, 9, and incorporating the forgiveness dynamic, they're all about freedom. Freedom from our addiction, placed in a position of neutrality, and freedom from unmanageability, a daily experience of a reprieve based on our practice of 10, 11, and 12. Not our perfection of 10, 11, and 12, but our practice of course correction in step 10. Our practice of improving our consciousness in step 11. Our practice of enlarging our ability to help other people in step 12. This is the process, a change in our attitude. We quit playing God. Humility. I don't mean humiliation, although much of my humiliation brought me to a place of humility. So it was therapeutic. To accept reality as it is, that was the biggest lesson in 1988. That reality just is what it is. One of the participants in one of my workshops just jumped up with enthusiasm. It was his 5th year in the workshop. And he said, Herb, I get it. I said, what, Jason? He said, reality's not personal. He did. It was a wonderful, I'd never heard it before, but it was a wonderful insight that captured his change in consciousness. Reality just is, and it isn't personal. And when we take it personal, we have unhealthy reactions. But when we see it as not personal, the reality outside ourselves, but even the reality inside ourselves, it's not personal. It's just who I am. Instincts gone awry. Oh, there I go again. Oh, there I go again. And in step 10, we stay conscious so that we can have course correction. It's about action. Step 10 is about action. Step 11 is about action. Step 12 is about action. In my meditation, this phrase came to me, and it's pretty confrontational, but it's also pretty revelational, if that's a word. It reveals something. A forgiving person has no past. We're released from our past, but an unforgiving person has no future. We're in bondage. We're in bondage of our past, unless you release it. This is us in addiction. This is us on a daily basis in unmanageability, even if addiction's not not present in our life. Unmanageability is that daily bondage that we can be free of if we realize that we hold the bars in our hand and we can drop the bars. Again, Angel mentioned that she does her evening review just to do a radar sweep of how did I do today? And I use the term radar sweep to see if there's any blips on the horizon. It's not a detailed and in-depth and concentrated effort that brings sweat to my brow, the evening review. No, it's a quiet, God help me see the truth and do a radar sweep of the day. And it's, no, everything's good. And I do the same thing in the morning, a radar sweep of the day in front of me. Any speed bumps that I need to anticipate, any speed bumps that I didn't see yesterday that kind of knocked me off my game. Gentle, gentle, gentle radar sweep, speed bumps, blips on the screen. I'm saying this for the perfectionists. Normally there's 20 or 30% of the group that's a perfectionist. Those of you listening to it. Perfection is not achievable. We're material beings. As such, we're corruptible. We're either integrating or disintegrating, going forward or going backwards. Bill said there's only 2 disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. Please hear this. There's only 2 disciplines. We don't need any rules, regulations, laws. We don't need any of that. Commandments. We don't need them. The simplicity of the 12-step fellowship culture and the 12 steps themselves is just so attractive. Bill said, never, never not exclusive. That's the word. I was fishing for the word. Never exclusive, always inclusive. There's only 2 disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is alcohol, and the other is God. In our current language, that doesn't have to be so God-oriented or spiritual or religious-oriented. It is spiritual, but let's say religious-oriented. We're either going toward the darkness or we're going toward the light. Keep it really simple. We're either going toward the darkness or we're going toward the light. It's a dimmer switch. Life is a dimmer switch. And there is a certain amount of life energy, and there's a certain amount of willpower on my part. And the combination is magical. My willingness and the presence of grace, that gift. And when I'm in cooperation with an open mind and open heart, and I keep myself leaning gently into the dimmer switch, we push the dimmer switch forward, and we don't allow it to go backward. It's on a mechanical device that forces it to go backwards if there's not a pressure leaning going forward. It's on a trip trigger to go backwards. Harry Tebow, I don't think I've mentioned that in this talk today. Psychiatrist that helped Bill in early AA, both with his personal life as also with the development of the program. Harry Tebow, a psychiatrist, medical doctor with a psychoanalytic training, a therapist. He said Bill got it wrong. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth. That's what we're talking about. The deflation of the ego, right-sizing the ego, that false self. We're not talking about that healthy ego that is the self, that gives us self-esteem, that is our core of goodness, that is our soul. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the mask, the persona that we develop as a delusional and artificial wall that we think protects us. And quite frankly, once we get some consciousness, we see that that wall is not protecting us, it's placed us in prison. And the whole process of a healthy therapeutic process, a healthy religious experience, a healthy 12-step process is the deflation of the ego at depth by the disintegration of the wall, by the deconstruction of the wall. That Hollywood storefront that we think is the real self, that is in fact the false self, so that the real self can emerge. We drop the bars, we take responsibility for our life, and we live in the light. We stay gently pressed up against the dimmer switch, moving it away from the darkness and into the light. And the really good news, you've heard me share it, that we're in pursuit of and in the presence of, surrounded by and saturated by infinite light. Surrounded by and saturated by. We marinate as human beings in infinite light. But we have to wake up. Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher, has a great quote. All human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. Bill got it. That's the purpose and the point and the mission and the value of step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening. We're asleep, dreaming that we're awake until we begin to wake up because we suffer in step 1 and we know we need help and we hope that help is there in steps 2 and we establish a relationship in step 3 and then we remove the obstacles to that relationship in steps 4 through 9 and then we live in the sunlight of the Spirit. Bill says it. After the 9th step, page 84, we enter the world of the Spirit. Those bedevilments are transformed into promises. The bedevilments on page 52, a direct contrast to the promises on page 83. This was done by Dan Sherman. I give acknowledgement at the end of this in my Way of Life document. Bedevilment. We are having trouble with personal relationships. Promise. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellow. Self-seeking will slip away. Bedevilment. We couldn't control our emotional nature. This is a description, behavioral description of unmanageability. And these are the promises after we finish step 9. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. Bedevilment. We were a prey to misery and depression. Our promise, our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Bedevilment. We couldn't make a living. Promise. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. Bedevilment. We had a feeling of uselessness. Promise. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. The correlation is so wonderful. I hope it was intentional on Bill's part when he was writing the book. We were full of fear. Bedevilment. Promise. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. Bedevilment. We were unhappy. Promise. We are going to know a new happiness and a new freedom. Bedevilment. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Promise, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. He says our liabilities now, our history now has become our asset. And the sunlight of the Spirit moving forward. We can help other people identify they had the problem that we had. We don't have it any longer because we did this process. So maybe if I do this process, I'll experience what you experience is freedom. And most of all, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Well, that's a big leap. It depends on what your steps 2 and step 3 experiences and assumptions are. But at the very least, it's a positive attitude toward life. At the very most, it's the hope that there's a power other than ourselves that is available to ourselves that we can establish a relationship with that will give us the ability for freedom. This is a program that is a process. It's got a lot of moving parts. Meetings, of course, are important, but they're not the program. Please hear that if you haven't heard it before. Meetings are important. I am not dismissing them, but they're not the program. They're just a gathering of people who are miserable or who were miserable and now have found freedom and want to help other people find that freedom. The big book is the textbook. It says it in the big book itself. It's the instruction manual. The phrase textbook is in the big book itself. And that's my experience with it. But I could not read it on my own. I needed a guide who had a light, that when they shine the light of their experience on the big book, the black ink on the page cracked open and revealed itself in terms of how to apply those steps to my personal life. The steps are the precise process, a textbook with a scientific formula for transformation, a scientific formula for change, a scientific formula for awakening, whatever the word you want, that turning. Recognizing I'm powerless, I pray. I love the set-aside prayer because it establishes that I am powerless and I need help, and I'm willing to have an open heart and an open mind, but I can't do even that. I pray for intervention, spiritual intervention. And I show my willingness because I'm open to taking contrary action, like we talked about. The actions will change everything. I needed to know better in order to do better, but I needed to begin to do better in order to know better. And I hope you get that in the context of what we've talked about in terms of Dan Siegel. I had a lot of information, but I had no transformation. You've seen me do that before. This man who took me through the steps in 1988, he didn't even know me, but we met coffee, and I told him an hour worth of my story, and he said, 4 years sober, you have a lot of information, but you have no transformation. You have academic knowledge in your head that's never filtered down through your heart to your feet. You have no experience. I mean, he was very direct. He wasn't being cruel. He was telling me the truth. I needed to take actions that I didn't know about. I needed to take actions, perhaps that I didn't even believe in. I needed to take contrary actions in order for my knowledge to change, and then my heart to change, and my feelings to change. But my feet went in front of all of that. I needed the guidance of a step guide, a sponsor. I've had sponsors as a sounding board for living life. I've had step guides for the Sherpa. I've learned a new word, Sherpa. It's that person who guides people up to the top of a mountain. They use the backpack and they guide them and they help them and they build fires and they cook for them. Sherpa. That person who guides you to the top of the mountain. It's a great term. S-H-E-R-P-A, I believe. Guides me to the top of the mountain. Doesn't do the walking for me, but helps me do the walking for me. My walking. Bill says very clearly at the end of step 9, we enter the world of the spirit. Well, where the hell have we been? Oh, we've been in the world of self. Steps 1 through 9. That's the commitment in step 3, to turn from the world of self to the world of the spirit, using steps 4 through 9 as that process. Bill commits that when we use our willpower correctly, doing this step work 4 through 9, we will have recovered. We will have physical sobriety, placed in a position of neutrality. Page 84, I've repeated it 3 or 4 times today to make sure that you get it. It's the promise of this process, finishing step 9. But he quickly says we're not cured. As I've commented, a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. How do we do that? Well, we keep the channel clear. I pick up the word channel from the St. Francis prayer. We keep the channel clear. Step 10 is about that, a spot check inventory. The 12 and 12, chapter 10, has a great description that helps unpack the big book's formula on page 84 for the 10th step. The 10th step is to be done on the spot when I'm disturbed. I have YouTube discussion in depth about that if you want to pursue that. It's very misunderstood in the rooms, the use of the 10 step. It's not in writing, it's not at night. At least my interpretation is. It's the formula that we use to intervene on ourselves when we're disturbed on the spot, if we can be that conscious. And then in the morning, for guidance, we fill the channel with light so that it will, in fact, eventually seep out into the community around us. We clear the channel of obstacles in step 10. We fill the channel with light in step 11. We empty the channel by just allowing it to seep out through our own wounds to the community around us, helping them heal from life's wounds by embracing the process that brought us to healing. To be useful, I've changed the word in step 12 for me from service to help. Service was too sophisticated, my meditation voice said. Herb, you need to change that. This was 30 years ago when I was finishing the steps for the first time and learning about meditation for the first time. Again, I have YouTube recordings, probably more than one, on prayer and meditation. Is my favorite subject. I learned to listen to my thinking as the medium of the message. I ask God to direct my thinking, then I begin to think, listening to my thinking as a direct answer to the prayer, God, please direct my thinking. My thinking is revealing to me the guidance that I need for the day or for the event or for my life. Meditation is the use of my mind to think and to listen to my thinking as God's message. Now, when I've done a fourth step, I can distinguish between my ego and my God normally. But that message, that voice said, change the word from service to help. Help has earth, has dirt in it. You will get tired. It will tax your patience. Help. Look through the lens of how can I help? I've added recently, how can I be useful? Because that word is used many times in the big book. How can I be useful? I clear the channel of obstacles in me that come from me in my interpretation of reality. I fill that channel with light. That meditation opens me up to receive the light and to grow in the light that is deep inside of me. It is not me, but it's available to me. Check it out, Appendix 2 in the back of the book. Unsuspected inner resource. Fabulous phrase. Unsuspected. I was a monk for 7 years. It never occurred to me that this divine was an integral part of me as my source of my life force. Unsuspected, inner, deep down inside of me. As I mentioned earlier, surrounded and saturated. Resource, a source of power and light and life. And then just to allow me to be available to help and be useful. Not necessarily in a 12-step program, but for in the community of humanity that I find myself. I'm going to pause on that for a minute and see if we have some questions, comments, experiences, suggestions, resistances, disagreements, any kind of comment that you feel would be relevant to this conversation would be, I'm inviting at this point.
One of the things, it's not directly related to this workshop, but one of the things you've said that has helped me so much is that there are no rules. Yeah. You know, that, you know, like if you have a sponsor that says you're going to do it this way, and then you have a, well, I want to do it another way, You know, there are no rules, and it isn't in order. And I heard that again today, that it isn't in order, you know, because I'm working on this step doesn't mean that if I haven't worked on the other steps, I shouldn't be at this step, you know.
Right.
So you just, I'm so grateful for you in my life. I mean, it's been a few years. I'm really grateful for you.
Yeah. We define a community wherever there are two or more. And that's what we had today. Yeah, we had a community of interested people in being better people. Yeah, cool.
Well, you help to keep me who or how or however you want to remember it, because this is something I constantly have to bear in mind. And I constantly have to remind myself there are 3 things that can stop you from completing this program if you don't have them. You have to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be willing.
Yeah.
And you have to be open-minded, right? You can't, well, that's crazy. You know, that would have been my response to a lot of stuff before coming in this program. It's just, well, that's nuts.
Yeah, that's the summary from the Herbert Spencer comment in Appendix 2 at the end of it. And you can turn the sequence of the words, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And then the acronym is how. This is really how it works. Yeah. I'm going to invite you then to the final prayer, which is my adaptation of the St. Francis prayer. And I took his name off of it because, first of all, he didn't write it. We all know that. I think that it was written in the 18th century and St. Francis lived in the 12th century, but it does reveal the principles by which he was trying to help people learn how to live life, is turning from the darkness to the light. But also I changed that last line. Rather than awaken to eternal life, I'm interested in whether or not there's eternal life, but I'm much more interested in living this life because that's the one I know about. So I changed that line. It is by dying, that's what we just described, the final phase of the death of the false self, to awakening. That's the promise of the 12th step. So let's pray. This prayer, I love the phrase, Spirit of the universe, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there is sadness, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven, it is by dying that one awakens to this life. Amen.